just gonna let it roll, and then we'll edit, throw it to iMovie and do it from there. How you doing?
Hey, Lishman.
On Facebook, I think there were 10 or 11. I don't know about Eventbrite.
There's 3 on Meetup.
There's what?
3 on Meetup.
3 on Meetup?
Or in development.
That's good. Hi. Yeah, it comes up. Come on in, we'll do presentations. I just texted you.
Oh.
Wow, that was quick.
That was.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, this is things are running concurrently, so everyone who's going to want to do the Ruby can be here for the next hour, and then we'll go back up to the teams. I'm just going to be here probably make sure everything's rolling for about 20 minutes, and then I'm going to run out. So I know that Daniela's up there.
And I've got reception, so
Okay.
Tom gave the guy my number, so.
Okay. Well, there was some pizza guy out front, but that was
That was
different.
for somebody else.
Yeah. Okay.
Unfortunately. When you were there in the beginning, he was trying to get everybody. Grab that.
We could probably wait another minute or two, but I think we can.
Why not?
Probably won't be like the entire hour.
Okay.
I mean, I can certainly extend it to like.
Well, because you have
just do
people.
some live coding.
There may be more questions.
Well, the other thing is we've asked everyone to bring equipment, so we want to make sure that everyone leaves, you know,
Now we're gonna get that.
maybe they can get going, get started on setting their environment. So we can kind of go around and help.
Install for everybody.
I would take the entire hour.
For you.
So now.
You know, it's a good thing you came back because we thought it was being donated.
Oh.
I think the problem, I mean, we should probably try closing it.
Kill Costco? To make sure, because we don't know which answer is the right answer. Just in case. Let's go back to where we're at.
Then you got. Get it recorded. I'm like staying away from the field of view. Be right out here. It's like, yeah. Camera, look at the slides. Well, there is no slides, but on the screen.
If you'd known it was being recorded, you'd have gotten a haircut,
Wait, but it's first I know what oh, you can do it.
Here to learn Ruby?
Yeah, I don't know.
You already know more than me.
What is the rule?
Okay, so you were on.
Stop lying.
Okay, so now.
You wanna plug coder key?
So we would for.
I
think it's time, right?
Yeah, we could put, let me take it off real quick. Hello, everybody. How you guys doing? Good? Good? Okay, great. So who's not from FIU here today? Not a student, or is everybody here more or less a student or affiliated with FIU? Just one, Achille? Okay, great. We welcome you to FIU and to a presentation sponsored by our group called AppDojo, in case you've never heard of it. We meet every Thursday night in 2330, and we help form teams that build apps. And so we're into technology that will make building apps easier. And for tonight's presentation, Joseph has graciously offered his time to give you a quick crash course on how to get started with Ruby. And I just want to say that if you're interested and you want to find out more about our group and what we're up to, you're welcome to join us Thursday night, 6:30. I'll leave you the information. We're in room EC 2330. We have 4 teams that are building apps. One just got their app rejected, so we consider that a win.
Rejected by what?
We'll get Apple, you'll see. And you can find us on Facebook and other places. If you found us because of the email message that was sent out, if you go to Facebook, .com/appdojo.mia and leave us a comment on the event. How did you like it? Was it good? Was it bad? Was there something that we were missing? We'd love to get your feedback. So appdojo.mia, and then just look at the events timeline, and then just drop your comment. If you want to be informed about other AppDojo events and the thing, just again leave a comment saying, hey, I'm in, keep me in the loop, and we'll put you on the list and invite you. We have a private group on Facebook that sounds so important, but it's probably meaningless. But we do share a lot of really good information on that private group, so if you are interested, we can get you on that as well. So that's the information, facebook.com/appdojo.mia. All right, without any more delay, I'll pass it on to Joseph.
All right. So hello everyone. My name is Joseph, and starting November 1st, I will actually be a full-time Rails developer. So I guess that's some credibility. But I've been messing around with Rails since like forever ago, like 2 years ago. And I thought I'd get I'd give this talk just to like get people, or tell people the story of how I got to this point. Give you the resources that I used so that you can also learn Ruby and Rails or whatnot, whatever you want to do. Quick survey. Who knows what Ruby is? All right, so Ruby is a programming language. So survey again. Who knows what Ruby is? Everybody's hand should be up now. All right, so Ruby is a programming language, and it got popular around year, I think 2000 something, mid-2000s, because of the Rails framework, and the Rails framework is a web application development framework. We'll get into that later. Another survey, who are the students here? Students. Now, in your curriculum, you're usually studying Java, C. So like Java's a high-level language and C is the low-level language, but there's Ruby is up and coming. Why did you turn the camera towards me, man? It's not cool.
We don't want a disembodied voice talking.
So Ruby is a pretty popular programming language now. I mean, considering that some of the top level Ruby consultants can charge anywhere from $400 an hour. So it's up there. But the thing is, they say computer science students can learn any language, whatever. But it also helps to know how to get started on that, so that's why I do this. So first things first is the resources. Later on, I'll show some live coding of Rails, just so you know what goes into this. So the first thing that I really liked while learning Rails was thru.org. That site is great because it takes you through the basics of the Ruby programming language without having to set up your actual Ruby environment, which is a little bit kind of complicated depending on what platform you're in. Because Linux and Mac have different procedures on setting it up. Windows has their own problems. But thru.org, it's great. It's got the interactive interpreter right here on the side, and then it's got the directions on. You just follow the directions. So you just help, oh wait, I'm not connected to my help. Put my password. So let's go back here, refresh. So when I tap help, that starts the entire tutorial, starting from basic, 2+6, all the way up to making classes and dealing with files and all kinds of stuff. It's great. And once you get past this, if you still like Ruby, then that's when you should start looking into actually setting up your local Ruby environment. And let's see, I just forgot to take my notes down. All right. Now, speaking of the local Ruby environment, most Ruby developers work with Macs. Leo there, I'm going to put him on the spot. He works for Citrix on Mac. I think all your coworkers are working on Macs, right? There's a company up by the airport called CareCloud, real big Ruby shop. And by big, I mean you have 5 Ruby developers. And all of them have Macs. And it's just Mac, the guy that made Rails works on Mac. So, yeah, it's easier to set up Ruby on a Mac, and it's also the optimal set. Well, Linux too, but not really. And then on Windows, before, a few years ago when I first started, the advice for developing Ruby in Windows was don't do it in Windows. So, but now that's changed. There's a lot of stuff that, let's see another thing. For the Windows people, Ruby installer. Ruby installer for Windows. You can download whatever version of Ruby you require, along with the dev kit, which allows you to build the gems, which I'll explain that later as well. And so, let's see here. And then for the Mac and Linux people, there's something called a Ruby version manager, because there's a few different versions of Ruby that are currently out and in production. So there's like the 187, 191, 193, and depending on what project you're working on, it could be using a different version of Rails, or a different version of Ruby. So people generally use a Ruby version manager. What I use is called RVN, and scroll down a little bit. It's basically a terminal tool that allows me to switch versions of Ruby depending on what project I'm using. And setting it up is just through Homebrew. I don't know if the Mac people have, no.
Question.
Yeah.
Why couldn't I just use the latest version of Ruby? Why would I need to switch between versions?
Depending on what you're working with, like let's say a project is using 187 and all you have is 193. Like let's say there's a project that was built on Ruby 187,
Right.
and then all you have is on your computer is Ruby 193. If you try to run that project, it's gonna break.
That's the question. Why would, if you write a program in PHP version 4 point something and I run in PHP 5 point something, it'll work. What's the difference in Ruby? Why won't a program in one version work in it? Sounds like
Not backward compatible.
is that
Certain versions are not backwards compatible. They have different syntax. They have different ways to do things. So, I mean, if you're working on a 1.9.7.3, usually the convention is if the second number is different, it won't be backwards compatible.
what was the design decision behind?
It's just versioning.
I would guess it gives you you don't have the
baggage.
the baggage to carry if you want to change
They don't
something.
want legacy.
Yeah, exactly. So you have more dynamic, more lively, more updatable language, you know, and so forth, as opposed to a language that lives for 10 years and then okay, it's gone now because you know a new language replaced it because it has too much baggage, you know.
But you know, the version manager kind of solves that issue. So you can just have multiple versions of Ruby installed, and you just switch between them depending on what project you're using.
Okay.
And another thing is, some people, the Windows people, I guess, scared is that there's no IDE. Well, there is. RubyMine is not free. But a lot of the people are, what most people use when developing in Ruby and Rails is just a text editor and a terminal. And you'll get to see that later as well. So now that we've gone through setting it up, after you've gone through try Ruby and you still like it, you then set up, what I did was I set up my Ruby environment here, and then I did this. This is called Learn Ruby the Hard Way. It's actually a series of different books. I think there's one for Python, there's, Learn Python, Ruby, C, regex, SQL. And this is a great tutorial for people that are completely new to the language. It starts you off with, the setup, strings, and see, it's just, printing out strings to the console. And you go through this, and it pretty much familiarizes you with everything that the Ruby language has. Well, not the really advanced stuff like metaprogramming, but majority of the features of the language are pretty much included here. And then there's also a book, which is kind of weird, but this guy, the Lucky Stiff, I think his name is, but he disappeared, I think a few years ago. Like, he used to be a really big figure in the Ruby community, and his name was just Y. And nobody knew his real identity, but I think somebody outed him, so he kind of just quit the whole thing. But his book still exists. It's kind of weird if you open the book. It's got these weird comics, but it's great. It takes you through the language, all the parts of the language, what instance variables are and methods and all that stuff. great resource. Another resource, but not so free, is Code School. This is actually Code School, or tryruby.org is actually part of Code School, but they have other lessons in here that aren't free. You gotta pay for, I think it's $25 a month. It's a subscription. And I actually met these guys at a Ruby conference earlier in the month because they're from Orlando. And these guys are awesome. So that's another resource. So if you just quickly peruse the courses over here, they have SAS, Ruby Bits, Git, try Git, RSpec, which is unit testing, Node.js. You know, there's other stuff in here. CoffeeScript. And the best thing about this is that all these lessons are all on the browser. So you don't have to actually set up your Ruby environment. You just go straight to the lesson and start typing code. If you type it wrong, it'll tell you. If you go through the lessons, it'll guide you through the whole process. And then now those previous resources are good for the newbies. This Ruby Cones is more for the intermediate people, and I'll show you why. Let's go through and let's see. Font here. Don't say this because you don't need that anymore. So here I am in terminal. Let's see. So this is the Ruby Cones. And what it is they actually built a unit testing framework that walks you through all aspects of Ruby. If you look here, so all these files, there's one that's about array assignments, about arrays, about this, and right now I'm at 61 out of 280, and it says about strings. So if we open that, about strings. Oh, it's supposed to be readable? Yeah. So it's, you kind of need to understand Ruby already for this to kind of make sense for you. But if we look at what it's saying here. There. So it says here, please meditate on the following code, and it tells you the file name and the line number. So if you go to that line number, line 124, this is where I'm at. And see here, there's a blank here, and this is a test that says double quoted strings, interpolate variables. And it says value equals 123, the string is blah, 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 and assert equals, and this should be, the value is 123. And when I save that, go back to the terminal and run this again. Like that. There, now that test passed and it's moved on to the next one. So that's more for the intermediate people, but it's another great resource for getting familiar with the language. Let's go back to here.
So basically, it's a unit testing framework for
Yeah.
which you actually
There's no
you
tutorial
learn-
using
you learn-
unit tests.
Right, you learn as you pass each test.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It's very awesome. And a lot of people that are advanced still go back and do these. Just, I mean, they can probably do it like all 280 tests in like, a few hours. This I've been working on for like a while. I mean, not full time, but every now and then I'll go in and do a couple. And anyways, another resource is these guys, the Pragmatic Bookshelf. These guys write the books that are just pretty much the main resources for the Ruby language, which is this book. Yep. Programming Ruby 1.9, 3rd edition. They call this book the pickaxe just because of the picture on the cover is a pickaxe. But this is pretty much the de facto Ruby language reference. Complete. It's fairly cheap if you want to just get the ebook, which is what I got, $25 for a PDF. No DRM, so you can make as many copies of it as you want, but don't. Let's see. Now, I was talking about Rails earlier, so they also have the book for Rails, which is Agile Web Development with Rails. Great book, walks you through how to make a web application using the Rails web framework. I have it as well. And then, let's see here, what is this one? Alright, so more resources on Rails. This is the official RubyOnRails.org guides. And if you look, or if you go through here, getting started with Rails, this walks you through making a quick application with Rails, which I'm actually going to show you later. And let's see, one more. Here's another one. It's part free, part paid. It used to be all free, but this guy is amazing. He has, he covers a bunch of different topics. The ones you see there are kind of just, authentication from scratch, but it's all Rails. And he shows you how to do stuff. It's all screencast. There's also, let's see, look at that. Oh, there's a subscription on that. So there's, this one isn't there, but usually there's a transcript for most of the lessons, but they come out later. I see they're still new. So you can either read it or watch it. Great stuff. And finally, probably the greatest resource available to aspiring Ruby developers here is the Ruby Meetup. And the reason I'm plugging that is because I'm one of the co-organizers. If you go to meetup.com/MiamiRB, you'll get to that page. And as you can see, there's the event for this thing. And we meet, we have a weekly meetup in the Grove, where we go to a bar and drink beer most of the time. Then we might, code, and then there's also a monthly meetup where there's a presentation, and, it's more formal. Very cool. Now, okay, so you've been sitting here looking at all the resources that I used trying to learn Rails, or Ruby. So let's actually put that into action, and I'm gonna try and do the tutorial. This tutorial. This one. So I'm going to go through this, but I'm going to try and do it from memory. So, we can go faster. So first things first, we start off in, I just have a project folder where I put all my projects. And this is kind of how the workflow is when you're building a Rails app. So you go Rails, new, and well, first let me show you.
Can you increase the font size a little bit?
So I just zoom in a little bit. There's the Ruby version that I'm using, 193p, patch level 194. There's actually a version newer than that, but I haven't done it yet. So let's see the Rails new, and we're going to say blog. And that creates a Rails project. Yeah, connected to the internet, so it's doing some internet-related stuff. Wait for it to finish. Finish. But yeah, there's a list of files that I created. Folders, stuff like that. Alright, so that's finished. We go and CD into log. And now that we're here, we can say, just make a new tab. I'm actually starting a web server locally so that I can test my app. And we can go to here, 0.0.0.0, 300,000. And there it is. That's actually the app running. It's just rendering that one file that it'll You know, so set up default routes, remove public index, because public/index.html is actually this thing that we're looking at right now. So we go back over here and rm public index. Okay. Now what happens is this thing breaks now, which is fine. Let's fix that by saying Rails G. Let me not use shortcuts. Now there's like more into, I'm kind of just showing you the workflow. I don't want to like explain every single thing because then that'll take like another hour. But I've actually done the talk on like, you know, getting started with Rails. But, you know, once you go through all the things that I showed you earlier, then you'll be able to do this. So here we have, I've just created a controller called home index, and now let's start editing this. So this is the folder structure of a normal Rails app. So we have controllers. This is where most of the code is going to be. Models and views. Database sits in there. Some configuration stuff. Most of the stuff I ignore because it's not really that good with Rails. Gem file. Cool. So that home controller that we created sits here. And for those that work with Java, that should look familiar. Class, home controller. There's a class called home controller. And then there's a method in there. I mean, the definition for a method in Ruby is kind of different from the Java. So that's the method definition. We'll leave that empty for now. And we're going to go to routes. And we're going to declare a route called route to home-index. And the routing is basically just routes. It's the URL structure of this web application. And right now I'm specifying that root, which is just, you know, this URL / will go to and execute, where's my text editor? Go to home controller. So going to this URL will execute this method. And if we refresh this, now it says home index, find me an app views home index.html. We go to the views, home index.html, and there it is. Cool. Alright. Now let's actually make something out of this, which is, you know, this is a blog, so Rails. Post. We're going to say title, which is a string, content, text. And now that that's done, we say array migrate. And then we go over here, /posts, and create a new post. Hello, AppDojo. Create that, so there it is. With one command in the terminal, I just totally created a blog application. I mean, it's ugly right now, but this is pretty much a full-blown app with, you know, persistence in the database, create, read, update, delete stuff. Go back and just destroy that post. Are you sure? Okay. And the code that generated is over here. Post controller. All the views for the posts. So there's the form, index view. Pretty cool. Now, obviously, you're not going to be like, scaffolding out. Well, you kind of do, but there's obviously more to, this is just a simple app, and there's more to creating web apps than this. I can, I guess, show you a more complicated project. Let's see. What do I want to show? I guess something that works. So, this one, let me stop this. This app, this past weekend, there was a hackathon, 48-hour hackathon called Rails Rumble, which I participated in, and this was the app I built in 48 hours. So I started that server. Let's show you the code. And this. Let's go over here and go to root URL. And there's this banner here from JavaScript that so here I'm going to log in. I hope I remember my username. Oh, perfect. All right, so you can see I'm logged in as myself, and you can create FIU rec center. Write a comment on it, full of rows. And the comment gets posted there, timestamp, and there's also the voting up and voting down things. And lists. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Reddit or Stack Overflow. That's basically a clone of that. You can post something and then users can vote it up or down against points, and depending on how popular it is. And this is what the idea came from a friend of mine who wants to build a site like this, but for fitness trainers and stuff like that, because she's a fitness instructor. So I built her a demo in 48 hours. And the code gets a little bit more involved. We look over here, controllers. This is the code that handles logging in and out, code that handles users, and then the code that handles all this stuff is here. There's the vote up and vote down methods, listing, creating a new one, and is pretty much, let's see, 7:33, so we got a good amount of time for questions. Anybody got questions?
When you did the scaffolding of the block, that clearly that's a like a plugin or something, where you can just.
It's not a plugin actually.
That's not a plugin. A predefined piece of code where you can just throw up and then modify.
Yeah.
How many of those predefined codes are there available that you can scaffold like that?
Let's see.
I mean, by default, right? Obviously, there's third parties.
So there's in Rails, there's a concept of generators. So you can generate assets, controllers, generators, helpers, integration tests, mailer, migrations, models, scaffold controller, and sessions. Those are the generators, and there's some here.
But the block is not listed there, right? So
The block, I use the scaffold, and that's basically it's just basic CRUD. So it creates a resource, which is like
okay.
at that point it's a post, and then it creates the CRUD methods for it, and CRUD stands for create, read, update, delete, which are the 4 basic HTTP verbs, or the 4 basic SQL verbs that map conveniently to HTTP verbs as well. So they just have that there so that you can just generated and then easily start modifying it to fit your actual app.
You mentioned gems. You want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Gems. So this particular app, this feature, we got here, the voting up and voting down, I actually didn't write it. It comes from a gem, which I just included in the project. And we look at the gem file. It's this thing right here. There you go. So now it's selected. And gems are, I don't know, Leo, how do you explain gems? Because like it's not just like little pieces of code. I mean, it could.
They're just libraries that give you some functionality. I mean, it's pretty much certain things that you would want to do that have been abstracted from projects that you would want to reuse them in other projects.
Yeah.
They bundle them up into libraries. They call them gems. And what Rails allows you to do is create a gem file, and you include all the gems that you want to use there. And one of the codes that we saw when he ran the Rails new was bundle install, and what that does is it runs through the gem file, installing all of those gems and any dependencies that they might have on other gems. So.
Yeah. So it's either gems are either software libraries where they don't actually do anything, or they could be like the Rails framework itself is actually a gem. If we go to rubygems.org, I think it works now. It was like down over there. But if we look at Rails, so the Rails web framework is actually a gem. And that's why it's in here as well. But like, there's a difference there because having that gem allows you to go to the terminal and say Rails, new, stuff like that. Most gems, not all gems do that. Some gems you can just include in your project and it allows you a little bit of functionality like thumbs up gem, which allows me to have add functionality of voting up and down or on my resources. And this one, particular one is the trainer resource. So that's kind of like the concept of gems.
Maybe now that you have internet, can you show us how to clone an open source project that you can easily like try to run to like show how easily can you some of you use code repositories. Programmers use code repositories to store their code online, right? So like a lot of people use they have open source projects, and you can just kind of like copy the code into your computer and run it and see what it looks like. I guess that I do that all the time to get inspired. When I start programming and I feel like I suck, and I'm like, man, I should not be a programmer at all. So I just go to GitHub and I start like cloning projects, which is kind of like copying a project into my computer, and I run it, and it's like, oh, it's a Facebook app, or it's like a Twitter app. It's like, wow, I want to build that. And you can see all of the code and everything, and some people, put a little bit of a wiki or tutorial of, how you can use it. So I don't know if you want to show something like that.
That project I showed earlier, the one with the voting up and down, so this is the project I based it on. A copy of that. So here, I just took this guy's code, random guy on the internet. This project was last updated 6 months ago. And he basically made a Reddit clone, and I'm going to do just took this guy's code from the internet and this shouldn't work anymore. I'll go to the root. And you got some propaganda over here, but it's attention. Okay. Let's see if he's got it.
So like, yeah, like eventually, like you can, I guess, borrow someone's code to see how it works in your computer. And I think it's a good learning experience because you can see how the code runs. You can look at the code and see, you know, what it means or how you can implement it in your own project.
Yeah, it doesn't have comments here. 0 comments. Can I have a comment? Oh, so that's how it does it. And this piece of code should look familiar. Vote up and vote down. I basically took it from here and used it on my app that I created in 48 hours. Pretty cool. Any other questions?
The underlying,
Go ahead.
the underlying database is, I was assuming MySQL.
By default, Rails apps come pre-configured for SQLite 3, which is just a file-based database.
Okay.
Configuring it for other databases. Database. So there's the development configuration and there's a test. And you can just change this to either use Postgres, MySQL, or whatever that you have drivers for. I think you can even do MS SQL. But most people use Postgres.
So the CRUD operations are generic in the sense that they go through the driver?
That's that comes back to the whole gems aspect. You would have to, if you wanted to use another database other than SQLite, you would have to include the gem for whatever database you're using, and that would just get mapped out through the gem to the database.
But I'd have to rescaffold, right?
No,
No, it'll take it all the
it'll
other
take the
Okay.
because that's independent.
Up here, there. Production settings for my gem file has MySQL on it. Because this app is deployed on a Linode server that has MySQL. And,
Is the gem management, the gem repository centralized?
yeah.
So
It
if
all-
I make a gem that I want to make available, I submit it. Is there an approval process? What happens once I submit it?
I'm not sure about the submission process for
You
gems.
can make any gems, so you just upload it to GitHub, and as long as you have the right specs, I mean, anyone can download it. It's
So
just
how do I get to that central gem repository? So everyone
It's
can.
rubygems.org.
there's different ones. There's some rubygems.org is one of the main ones. There's also RubyForge, but like I said, it's you upload it to GitHub, and that's how you hand it to them. You hand it to them. You give them that link, and they upload it to their servers.
Okay.
But,
Yeah, you can actually, like in here, I'm just like, this is just, all these are just by default coming from rubygems, but you can say comma, and then the GitHub URL, and it'll download it from GitHub.
I see.
And by the way, on one of the links that we showed earlier, there's actually on one of the articles it says how to use the Ruby files and where to get the Ruby files and how to find the right Ruby file for whatever project you're working on. So I actually saw it when it was in one of those links we provided earlier.
Okay. I have one last question.
Yep.
So, okay, so you built your app. Now, how do I deploy it? How do I get it on my server? What are the steps?
There are a few ways of doing it. The Rails Rumble. Let's go to Rails Rumble. These ones, finally. Oh, competitions done, but Linode has virtual like Linux servers, and they have stack scripts that set up Ruby, whatever database you need, and stuff like that to set it up with, I think, either Apache or whatever. There's a few different web servers that work with Rails
Okay.
that you set up on a Linux box, and then you just deploy your app to that. And then there's also Heroku is completely like cloud-based. You don't need like any kind of IT skills as far as like managing, because you just basically make a few changes on your. Let me see if I can. I think it's about it. But this is like straight from your Rails app. You just add a git remote to Heroku, and you can just say git push Heroku, and then it'll push it to a Heroku instance of your app, and then run it. And it has a Postgres database.
What I was more thinking of was the, let's say I have a box that I want to, so I have some PPS or something somewhere.
Yeah.
So if I was doing, say, Java app web applications, I know that I create a WAR file, and I just put that on a Glassfish or some server container. What is the analogous Rails or Ruby?
You actually copy the source file over.
Depending on which environment you're using, because there's also like the environment that he's using, and I think it's MRI or something like that. That one, you can actually use, there's a gem called Capistrano, in which you actually write recipes, and you tell it where to deploy the server, and a bunch of options it gives you.
And it'll copy the files over.
It'll actually create the structure for you, and it'll do it for you.
But yeah, your source is up there.
But at the core, it's my source files that I just copy up, similar to what you do with PHP.
Now, there's JRuby, which is Ruby running on the JVM, and those you can compile down to
WAR files.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's other versions of Ruby out there that run on different platforms. There's actually MacRuby. What else?
What's the largest
There you
web company or like Facebook or whatever that's running on Rails?
go. GitHub's running on Rails.
Twitter used to run on Rails.
Twitter.
Groupon?
What? Groupon, Shopify, Living Social. What else?
Okay.
Oh, funny thing about Living Social. I met a guy that I think he works there, or he graduated from Hungry Academy, which is actually sponsored by Hungry Academy. So, in the Ruby community, there's a massive shortage of developers, and so there's too many jobs, not enough developers. So, Living Social set up Hungry Academy, which it's a 5-month program where you spend like 14 or 16 hours a day learning Ruby, Rails, everything. Like, that's all you're doing for 5 months. And at the end of the program, either Living Social hires you, or they find you a job, which is pretty much guaranteed. Because there are people out there looking for Ruby or whatever developers. And I think they run it like once a year. There's also another company in Boston called ThoughtBot, and they run an apprenticeship program that's 3 months, where you apprentice, I don't know if it's paid or not, but you become an apprentice to one of their developers, and by the end of the 3 months, either you work for ThoughtBot or you're hired somewhere else. And most of these companies are doing that because it's just, it's easier for them to grow developers than it is to actually find someone that is knowledgeable.
And they get to pick the cream of the crop.
Yeah.
For the
themselves.
Well, they train them up, and if their personalities don't agree with each other, I guess they send them to other companies. Let's see what else. So let's see, Ruby on Rails.org. So we go Basecamp, which is pretty much where are you familiar with Basecamp?
I know it, but I don't use it.
Basecamp is actually the app where Rails, the framework, originally came from. So the guy, the 37 Signals, the guys that developed Basecamp, extracted out Rails out of Basecamp. And that's where the framework came from. So you got Twitter, GitHub, Groupon, Shopify, Yellow Pages. See more. Nothing like, most of these apps are like hipsterish. Lumosity, I've been seeing commercials on TV. Penny Arcade. Funny old guy apparently. That's a good amount. And this competition, there was like, all these apps are Rails apps, and there's like 300 something teams that participated, including me.
I have a question, just a comment, I guess, just an FYI. So I don't code in Ruby on Rails, but my colleague at Colorado does.
Okay.
And so he's built one of our games, essentially uses Ruby on Rails in the back end. So just as you can use Rails not just to build websites, but also API endpoints.
Okay.
So that's how he does it. So he does all his persistence and everything else. So there's no web front end, but there are APIs that he's calling from his Android app.
Yeah, one thing to note is that Rails is just the framework. There's many frameworks for Ruby.
Yeah,
like,
there's Sinatra.
There's Sinatra, which is a nice, like a lightweight version of Rails. And there's tons of others, but Rails was basically created to be a web framework, but people have modified it, and people actually use it to make API endpoints. So it can be used for anything. So
I wish he was here, because he actually did investigate Sinatra, but decided to go with
Rails would probably be the easier way.
it's easier because you get a lot of extra support. But with Sinatra, if you just wanted to make something quick, like an upload download server, you would use that because it's just 2 little API endpoints and that's it.
I was gonna say that looking at this competition, I would assume that you can use Ruby on Rails to develop a prototype that actually looks good. I'm just kind of like looking at the screenshots, and a lot of websites, they look really good.
Well, I mean, these guys, some of these teams are like professional developers. When I showed you my app, that was just me by myself. I didn't have a team. I had 48 hours to build that thing. Some of these guys there's a team somewhere that works for, one of the teams that participated was actually from Basho, Rice. He had a team with his coworkers. And was sponsored over there.
Joseph, can you make yourself available if somebody wants to install the framework in the computer?
Yeah.
If anybody wants to set up, if they don't have it installed already, so you can help them out?
Yeah.
I mean, probably in the future.
I mean, I'm doing this because I support not only the Ruby community, but the tech community heavily. I will volunteer my time to do these kinds of talks. I've done talks for, since 2010, I think was the first time I started doing talks. This one was kind of informal, and I didn't really practice it.
Well, I didn't want to thank you for your time. And I guess if anybody wants to get bootstrapped, Joseph's here to help you out and point to some of the links that he's got, and then maybe he can help you get set up if you.
And if you guys have any more questions, like if you're actually going to go through with this, hit me up on Twitter. Just tweet at me with a question, and I will do my best to answer it. And if I can't answer it, I'll point you to the person that could probably answer it.
That's a great offer. So I hope you take it up on it. So I want to thank Joseph. Thank you very much for your time to share what you know with the group. For those people who are AppDojoers and teams, we're going to head back upstairs to 2330. Those of you who want to stick around and work with Joseph, the room is ours until 9, so you can just hang out if you want. If you want to just find out more about AppDojo, you can come upstairs with us, 2330, or post a note on the Facebook event, and we'll be happy to fill you in about what we're up to. And thanks for coming.
We have the time.
Yeah,
No, but those two.